Hello, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the episode 23 of the IET India Digital Conversations. I hope all of you are doing well and keeping safe. As India strives to find the right balance between innovation and regulation in the field of technology such as AI, in today's episode, we will understand the need and meaning of ethical AI, its implementation, challenges, and frameworks as we strive towards a responsible AI for all nations. This approach has been developed by the NITI Aayog based on a large-scale stakeholder consultation facilitated by the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution India of the World Economic Forum. I'm Suman Bhamik, your weekly host, and I lead the series and I lead the events for IT in India. I would like to thank all of you speakers for being with us today as we look forward to a high energy and interactive discussion. I would pass it over to you now, Samir. I'll be around if you need me.
Great. Thank you so much, Suman and IT, for setting up the context and inviting us over. And I must admit to start with, in fact, sometime knowing someone is far more better than what I call not knowing someone. And this is a testament of this panel discussion. I have a privilege of knowing all the participants in the panel very, I would say, deeply. We have discussed and shared a range of, I would say, topic themes and discussions over the last multiple years. And this is where I think having to know Rohini, Avik, and Nitin would be, I would say, a plus point, because I think the theme per se, ethical AI, is broad, diverse, and calls for a well-rounded discussion, as I say. And I think there is also, while I look at this eclectic panel, there is also a very high streak of diversification of thoughts which the participants will be able to kind of absorb. One, if I talk about Rohini, uh, the fact per se, while she's working with Microsoft, the concept about ethical, explainable AI, and she'll talk and discuss about that, itself is embedded in the strategic imperative of Microsoft as an organization, and it's driven from the top. Avik, while he has worked with NITI Aayog and his current stint with ISB, I think there is a big layer of how this entire aspect of ethics around AI, he's been able to see that from a NITI Aayog perspective and also in the current role of what he's doing at ISB. And Nitin, he's worked with different industries, and this whole concept of AI sometimes being construed as a black box is something what he will demystify in terms of what it brings to the table in terms of what we usually call the magic of AI. And this is where I think the panel per se will be able to bring very diverse, very, I would say, elevated, but very meaningful conversations. And the whole intent of this panel is actually to look at three aspects. One, this aspect around ethical AI is something what we will try to demystify, we will try to deconstruct in terms of what's happening in terms of the whole developments over there. Second, there are a range of challenges. There are a range of impediments or hindrances which are causing the ethical AI not to go mainstream from a governance, from a policy perspective. And the third, which will be more prescriptive as we kind of deep dive in terms of the conversations, will be how do we go about making it not only a specific agenda for corporates, for states or countries, but for, I would say, nations and humanity at large, because this particular piece, if not attempted, can actually create a havoc for not only, I would say, nations, but for humanity as an overall, I would say, thing as well. So let's try to kind of take that aspect with something what I call it a germane, but very essential, taking a view from each one of them. And I'll start with Rohini. Rohini, from a participant perspective, we would like you to please share your thoughts around what is this whole aspect around ethical AI? Why there is so much of furor, flutter, and there is so much of also a genuine conversation which is going on? And what do you see as a part of Microsoft in terms of what's happening on addressing this particular thing? And it will take, I would say, chunks of this and maybe break as part of the conversation. But I wanted you to please start with your opening thoughts.
Sure. Thank you, Samir. And thank you for setting the context. If we look back at the use of machines, use of computers, machines for decision making, this is not new. But I think the important distinction that is that in many sectors across the industry, you name it, for the first time in the history of humanity, uh, human machines are now taking decisions on topics, on issues that previously only human beings did. And in many cases, machines are making those decisions without a human oversight. And potentially, there are areas where machines have been able to, algorithms have developed enough that, from a cognitive skills perspective, areas we thought were early only possible by humans are now being done by machines, if as much as human parity, or in fact, even better in some cases. So, therefore, it makes us pause and think as to what does it mean. And I think that is what is causing the whole discussion around ethics responsibility. But having said that, I would also just as an initial comment say that in a way, it's also making us question what our ethics are in the first place. Not just what machines' ethics are, but what are our human values in the first place. What do we mean by fairness? What do we mean by inclusion? We can go down, right? Because very often we have gone down the path of things were done in a particular way, and so they have kept, they've been, continuing that way, and we really haven't questioned them. So in many ways, it's actually asking us to question our humanity and question what values do we want to stand for. So it's a bigger conversation than just about machines, in my view.
So I think you mentioned about fairness and inclusive. And Rohini, I'll come to you separately in terms of taking this thing in terms of more elevated conversation. But just to link this particular thing, Nitin, I'll ask you this aspect about what we usually construe AI as a black box. Having said that, Rohini touched and alluded to a very great point about decision making. Now, suddenly we find machines challenging the decision making of the humans, and at somewhere there is a slugfest about who controls what. In your opinion, and you're working for a large bank, you worked for a conglomerate, you've also worked for a retail. When you look from a perspective of AI, how do you see this whole question of ethics coming into the picture? And I would rather suggest you to take a corporate or an enterprise viewpoint, please.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Samir. But coming back to the question that Samir posed about the use of AI, use of explainable AI by corporates, I think explainability is a totally different thing, and there are areas where you need a higher explanatory power of the AI, and it's predominantly because of just regulations. There is no corporation, there is no enterprise, to my mind, where they would want to hold themselves back from using a particular piece of AI or advancement of AI if they're not allowed to. They would want to use it for their benefit, and the reason for that is because enterprises exist at the core, at the basic, for making money. And if they can use humans, which until now have been doing that in terms of making the decisions, they want to append, they want to augment, they want to make the decisions better by leveraging AI. They will. And the fact that the explainability is such a huge factor is because at the core of it, humans still want to own and still want to have, if I can call it, the illusion of owning the decisions, because they want to have a final say. If a machine recommends certain thing because of what the data is telling, and that's where we should go, a person still wants to have the final word, the final say, because he or she thinks that he knows better or she knows better. So that's one force that is driving. In fact, I would also try to veer and steer the conversation a little bit towards what Rohini was talking about, and I think about it sometimes as well, is this whole development in AI, the whole complex models, more and more complex models that we're building, which are far superior, surpass our abilities to do what we can in terms of thinking, in terms of working, in terms of scaling our capabilities, are being driven by who? Are being developed by who? It's only humans. And why are humans doing it? Because they think that they want to gain more power, because they want to sort of continue to be that supreme being which we all have tried to become already. And we want to use AI as our slave, as our enabler. But the fact is, if you don't, and if you don't have the right governance, if you don't have the right control around it, whether it is corporates, whether it is somewhere else, it can very quickly become a, a, a beast which comes back to bites us. So I think those are a few things which I sometimes think about, whether in the corporate and enterprise setup or not, or in general. But in terms of explainability, if you were to ask me why it's important, to my mind, the core of that is because humans still want to have control, and they don't want to let the control go away.
Right. And I'll pick up what you said, and this is something I'm just trying to take those meaningful, what I call context. Rohini talked about fairness, inclusiveness out there, and you talked about governance because that's a very large component of making AI more ethical and much more, I would say, manageable in terms of how it needs to proliferate within enterprise. Switching to you, Avik, and this is where I would say the range of conversation changes. Specifically, now I want you to do a bit of, I would say, kind of, let's say, backup. NITI Aayog, you've been associated and you've worked on multiple interventions on the AI side with the NITI Aayog and other, I would say, government bodies. Now, from a construct of how government looks at this manageability around AI from an ethics, governance, fairness point of view, what do you think has been the stance from the government side in terms of managing how AI should be kind of regulated or not? And I'm just taking a surface level because this is one particular piece which I'm sure, Rohini, you can also add value because there are multiple stream of industry, consortia and government bodies you work. But Rohini, this is in your turf, please. So maybe if you can
Yeah.
actually lead this particular conversation.
Yeah, sure. I think we just had, and as soon as Avik comes back, Avik should probably jump in as well. The recent government global conference, which was extremely well orchestrated, curated, and attended around the world, was really leading with responsible AI. Right? It was about responsible AI for social empowerment. And there were multiple global experts from India and around the world speaking about the topic. I think the NITI Aayog recent paper, which has gotten released, the framework on ethical AI, which has gotten released in consultation with the World Economic Forum and in the entire industry, taking the stakeholder inputs, etc. It's a really good, I would say, effort. It's a really good effort in terms of putting a structure and framework. The issue with this topic is the framework is just the starting point. Right? It's just the starting point, and the good thing is the starting point is at the right time as the government is thinking about AI increasingly and increasingly looking at data to make decisions. So the timing is great, but I think it's still a long way in terms of awareness, in terms of taking those frameworks and principles into putting them into practice and really imbibing them as part of doing the operations, right? So there is a long journey there, and from Microsoft's perspective, we've been on this journey ourselves for the last 4.5 years. Started out with principles with Satya's blog way back in 2016 sometime, and then it's been through a long journey, and we've learned from our mistakes from globally, from different use cases we've seen around the world, and of course, being the global organization that we are in, we see a very diverse set of societies, right? Very diverse set of values and social structures. So there is learning, and India will have to, and the government will have to go through that similar learning. But it's a good indication, and as you probably know, India is also part of the founding members of the Global Partnership on AI. So we are doing the right things, and I feel quite positive about the fact. And again, it's a learning journey. But over to you, Avik.
Awesome.
No,
And when you come back to you in terms of this trifactor, what Microsoft is talking about, which is strategy, ethics, and culture. So I'll take your views on this.
one thing I wanted to just step back and talk about is around lunchtime now, and some of you might be having lunch. So giving a very simple, non-technical description about what is happening in the world. So I'll take an example, maybe just a simple example. Say food is fed. There is some food that has been cooked and been fed to people. Just to give you a context about what the type of problem that we are talking about, and where it is coming from. And yes, and this is talking about all the ethical aspect. So food has been cooked and been fed to people for say the last 10-20 years. For the 10-20 years, AI has been around. There was scarcity of food around, so people didn't question too much about food ka taste kaisa tha, how tasty was the food, what was its nutritional value and things around that. So whatever was available was been fed to people. Now with lot of abundance and awareness, what is happening is that people are starting to ask questions. Is the food spicy, too spicy for the kids to have it? Touching upon a lot of the ethical aspect. Things like, is it well cooked? Like well cooked is I bring in the aspect of well cooked because often a lot of the challenges that we face in AI from the ethical aspect is because a lot of the data has not been collected well to represent all sections of the society. So a deep research has not been done, and deep data collection hasn't happened. There are status of the society that get left out. There are ethical aspects like is the food that has been cooked nutrition and healthy. With the abundance coming up and lot of people being aware of this issue, we are actually starting to ask this question, which are all societal issues and which are all correct questions. For a long time, these issues have not been asked. All four of us on this call, we have been doing AI for the last 10-15 years. We haven't thought about ethical aspects so much. Our intention and goal has been mostly 10 years back has been to get a system in place which gives good accuracy and then put it on the field. Again, optimizing for time and other things. So those are things that have been there. So also what also is affecting is that from businesses adopting it, it is touching more citizens' lives. So more citizens' life when it's impacting, it is going on to the sectors like say healthcare, agriculture, education, which are sectors where the government, at least in the Indian perspective, are directly involved in, and it involves millions of people. So it becomes an area where you need to know whether corporations who are rolling out this AI are doing the correct things or not. I think that is where the government perspective is, because I was part of the team that came up with the AI strategy in 2018, and then the responsible AI document that came up with WAF only came up this year. So there was a 2 years gap. We thought about we knew those were the issues at that time. But in the strategy paper, there were only 5 pages spent on ethical AI because the other aspects needed. So the awareness of other government ministries and bringing them on the page. Ki, acha, why are we talking of ethics of AI? If you had, say, kept 20 pages on ethics of AI in 2018, that would have not got that much of years, because you have to first make aware what AI is, what data is, the issues that are being discussed now, the data privacy bill, the non-personal data. So these have actually brought in a lot of awareness and discussion in the society, beyond the technical community. Technical community knew about it to a large extent, but I think beyond the technical community, I think a lot of these issues have been discussed. And I think that is where I think that the government is stepping up.
It's more of a question that I wanted to ask, because of course I've seen that briefly, that the policy, of course, not read the details, you would know it, and what you're saying is, and my question is it okay if something is being fed which is not good for somebody's health when it is fed for only one person, and it becomes unethical and incorrect that it is fed to 100,000 people? Is that what you're saying? Is that what the government's point of view is? Or do you think we are already late in defining what the ethical AI should we should have been some time ago, and also brings it back to what Rohini was saying. What is the definition of ethics? What is the definition of ethical AI? Because that definition, at least to my mind, which is conforming to the societal norms, is transient. It doesn't remain. It doesn't remain static. What was okay some time ago is not okay now. What is okay today will not be okay later. Or what we believe is okay today is going to be completely out of context. And a context, the same action, the same definition, the same set of rules taken out of one society and put into another societal rules have totally different meaning. So how do we get our head around those things? What is the government doing about that? And I know it's probably more of a question that I'm asking rather than a comment. But I really thought, when you mentioned those things, those were a few thoughts that were bubbling up in my head.
So, Samir, you want me to take it now, or?
Yes, go ahead.
So I think yes, that is a very important and interesting question that we need to tackle. Ethical AI is something that NITI Aayog has been looking into, and we have been looking for experts to guide us, because as you will know, that government ministries, when they are coming up with such strategy document, we work with a lot of experts in doing that, because it's a team of say 3 or 4 people who work on these things, and there is a extended team of experts, like say people from Microsoft, Accenture, PwC, all comes in, and they also put in their inputs. From ethical AI, what we have put up is that what needs to be done. How it needs to be done, we don't have a clue at all till now. I think no country has come up with laws till now on AI. Everyone is just talking of some thought document. IEEE has some ethical aligned framework. EU has some liability framework. Companies like IBM and Microsoft have come with some fairness framework. But when you talk about government implementing something, so there is a big process that comes. First, there is the intention to do something on AI ethics. Then comes the discussion and coming up with white papers on that. So like some sort of solution white paper. Then that white paper has to be turned into a bill or a law. So if I take the example of the personal data, the data privacy bill, the PDP bill, so which was the first draft came out in 2018, because we want to protect personal data. It went through the consumer citizen feedback. The updated draft came out 2019. It went to the parliamentary committee for passing into a bill. Now it is with the joint parliamentary committee headed by Mr. Shashi Tharoor. So when they come back with their feedback, then the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha will pass it into a bill. But that is not all. After that, they have to allocate money to implement that. The data privacy bill, I'm going to the context, because some bill which is already been discussed. They talk about a data authority. That will do the data verification, or like the CAs does, chartered accountants does auditing of the financials. The data auditing organization will do the auditing of the organization's data every 6 months. So that organization doesn't exist today. So even if the bill is passed in 2020 or 2021, who will do that? You have to train people and give companies also time. If I am running a business, I have not been maintaining that, because that was not a requirement till now to do it. So I will have to be given 1 or 2 years time. You now put your data under this system, under these laws and things, and then maybe 2022 will be if it's passed in 2020, they have to give at least 2 years time to put the data in place, so that by 2022 we will start auditing you. So the time from the intention started in 2017, when the Supreme Court Puttaswamy judge told that privacy is a fundamental right. That is when the bill started. To 2022, at least 5 years it will take, and it might be even longer, when something in action will happen. Till that time, people can't do anything.
So, Avik, if I may chime in, yeah, we have issues today, as I could actually gather what Rohini and you are saying. We have frameworks, we have approach notes, but somewhere this execution needs to happen, because unless the execution happen, we won't be able to know whether the efficacy and effectiveness of this ethics stands true or not, and then the modifications and tweaks can happen accordingly. Let me back up and actually ask this question, and it's open, any one of you can chime in. Now, fundamentally, and all of us come from analytics AI background, and For the participants, I don't want to take it to the brass tacks. There is a term called algorithmic malpractices, biasness in the algorithms, and Nitin and Rohini touched upon. The fact over there is that analytics community as a whole understands that when we develop some tweaks in the algorithms, when we do some changes, and if there is some kind of a vested interest or there is some kind of a just an attempt for us to tweak or drift the algorithm, it changes. The algorithms behave differently. Now, from a community perspective, from the people who are part of this AI analytics community, shouldn't first of all the ethics be laid out as part of making the algorithms more steady, robust, and there should be a framework where algorithms are audited and actually regulated rather than going to the next level where we're talking about data privacy. Any thoughts, Rohini, from your side on this?
Yeah, so I want to make one important point, folks. As a technology, AI is very much in its infancy, and in many ways, as any technology which is exponential in nature and is in its early stages, it is a field of experimentation, and it is a field of discovering what the possibilities are. And I think it is very important for us as a country to be cognizant and be bold about experimenting with it. And the reason I say that is the backlash of the conversation that we are having, and if we kind of take it to an extreme to say this is all evil in some ways or damaging in some ways, the backside of it can be that we can miss on this revolution, and we just cannot afford to. Because as a country, for our competitiveness, for our economic value, the need for leveraging data as a fundamental driver of value is super critical for the country. So I think we have to keep that in mind. Now, what that means is that as you go about innovating, how are you putting in the checks and balances? Right, which is the discussion we are having. But I wanted to put it out there that we have to know that this is an area we will need to move forward, and it is too important for the country to lose time, because there are other bigger forces and other countries who are really investing very heavily in this space. So now, having said that, to your point about bias and about algorithmic malpractice, the way you called it, look, I think at the end of the day, algorithms are developed, designed, trained by humans. In most ways, right? I mean, if you look at some of the machine learning recommendation, etc., inside there's mathematics, and there is some, certain parameters have been set. So therefore, the need for awareness, therefore the need for checks and balances, and the tools and techniques to bring the principles we are discussing here into practice become important. And it is, and that is why some of the global partnerships to learn from each other become important, because this is not an area you can start to say just start regulating everything. It will not work. It is too early. You don't know what to regulate, except for some very corner cases like face recognition or maybe a couple of other things you can talk about, where there is a reason to say, there is a need. But I really think of it as a carrot and a stick. Okay, there is the stick of regulation in very, very specific areas, but it's mostly about the carrot. And what I mean by that is organizations that really care about what they stand for. They care about what their brand is. They care about 10 years later what they would be about. For them, it is about the right incentives to imbibe these technologies, the principles and frameworks into putting some of these principles. So it's a complex issue, and I feel that it's important for us as leaders in the industry to understand that it is not about regulating. It is not about saying the innovation can stop. It is about understanding the nuances of this topic and bringing in the right guidelines, frameworks, tools, techniques, practices, governance to ensure that as algorithms are being put out there and are scaling, are having the right checks and balances.
Great.
Hey,
So
I had dropped off, and I missed this question, but I heard what
Rohini was saying.
Nitin, could you hear the question? What we were talking about,
No,
or you?
I couldn't hear your question, Samir. I had dropped off by then, but I obviously caught quite a bit of what Rohini was saying, so I've been able to understand her point of view, but I don't necessarily have the context of the question.
Okay, so let me just take your views and I'll just go with the question again. We were talking about while there is an extreme sense of buoyancy around AI, we also realize today that when there are algorithms which are being developed and curated, there are malpractices, there are biasness, because there is a bit of disparateness from an industry point of view, how it's curated, how it's designed, and how it's managed. Uh, and somewhere, while we talk about data privacy, shouldn't also we have algorithms be audited, or there should be a framework to design and kind of develop all algorithm? And since you also have seen the enterprise view, would you like to comment on this?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think absolutely, absolutely. Because what we are right now we're trying to do is trying to let the thing develop as it is and across all dimensions, and then trying to put pressure points and controls about where it can be used. So I think of ethics of AI as two ways. One is how good and how pristine and how clean and unethical, fair and ethical the algorithm itself is. That's one thing. The other part of ethics of AI is how any algorithm that we have developed is being used. And right now, it seems to be more around whether we will allow certain use to be done or not. Even there are lots of question marks. The same use is okay in some situations. We spoke about facial recognition. Facial recognition for safety. Nobody even bats an eyelid when anybody says that the safety aspect is really paramount and you want to use facial recognition. But when it comes on surveillance, obviously everybody's frowning on that, right? So there is also the two sides of the same coin about the use. But right now, all the governance, all the discussion is really about the usage. There is very little, and I think that's exactly what probably Rohini was saying, is about the pristineness, the correctness of the algorithms. Who really understands it to that level? In fact, even the developers themselves, do they really understand the way the machines are really picking up those signals? Are they amplifying it? Are they suppressing some signals? Are they getting confused by some signals? That the algorithm itself can be considered good enough and of a certain quality, a 22 carat or 24 carat certification, if you can think of, for it to be used appropriately. Because if you think about, the same facial recognition algorithm can be very easily confused just by putting a few dots here and there on the thing. There have been jailbreak or fooling the AI examples where somebody just stands up with a smiley face in front of their torso, and the algorithm is not able to discern that. So I think there is absolutely a long road ahead of us. But to my mind, if we have to really start putting our effort and focus, it should be really about developing good quality algorithms, and then also at the second level about use of those. But the use of that also is, to my mind, very transient, very non-static and non-standard. It's your version versus my version. It's use case versus a different use case.
Great. So I think what at least I'm able to infer is what Rohini also said. Technology like AI, or rather AI, not specific only to technology. I mean, something which is absolutely, I would say, emerging. There is bound to be initially a lot of, I would say, issues around how do you kind of make it more standardized, more structured, and maybe more kind of, let's say, concerted. But the moment proliferation, the moment kind of we get more use cases, there are governance frameworks which are implemented somewhere holistically, then the clarity emerges in terms of how algorithms in this case needs to be kind of managed more from a, I would say, best practice sharing or a template perspective. Avik, I want to shift this conversation more specifically, and this is during the introduction, it was mentioned that you're working on this portal, open data platform. Now, with all due regards, open data platform as a word has been overused, kind of a thing. But I know there is a specific initiative and interventions you're working. Would you like to talk about that? And within the context, the reason I'm asking you is you mentioned about data privacy. Now, as a part of that particular doing the groundwork, how exactly are you ensuring that this whole privacy governance is taken care of?
Yes. So this is we are not putting any public data there. So it is all government data on different websites that are there. What and they are in for some of the data you have to first select a state, then a district, then the sub district, and you get some data. For some of these data, this is in PDF format. So what we are doing is that we are taking data across different ministries of the Indian government and putting the data in a machine readable format along with the analysis at a single click. So this is targeted. It is a aim towards data democratization. So a person who doesn't have a skills for say doing visualization, doesn't even know how to do a chart in Excel, and he wants to say see what is the some aspect in say Karnataka, he can come and do a query and he will get the visualizations directly at his fingertips. So he doesn't need to know any of the data things, doesn't to understand anything. So this is more for the citizens to have a more data led discussion. This is not the data for AI. It is more data for discussion about government data, data for journalism, data for research. Sort of there, data for AI is where we are talking about is more granular level data. If you have to do AI, I think we are not there yet. I think that's sometime in the future that we have. So yes, and there and recently what we have done is that we have also started an open data community of enthusiasts who are interested in open data in India, and Dr. Rohin is also a part of it. So we want to basically set up some of these standards for sharing open data from the community perspective, because what we have seen is that it's always a one-way thing, the government pushing things that they need, but often you came up with a very interesting suggestions, and that's also another way. What you suggested was that, say, if the industry come up with some regulation that all industry in India, and limited to in India, knowing that both the companies that you, Dr. Rohini and Nitin work on are global companies, say in the Indian perspective, they decide that whatever AI application they develop, and all the companies decide that they will follow certain norms, and they have to collectively come up with that, and then they can take these norms to the Ministry of IT and tell that, see, these are the norms for automated decision making. Means AI is some sort of automated decision making that we have come up with, and then see what the industry's view is. Because see, if we rely upon government doesn't have the expertise. Ultimately, they have to come up with you. So either you wait for the time when they will pull the information from you and request and set up a committee, or you can push it if you want to do it. I think what you suggested is a very good thing. I'll give you a very parallel example. OTT platforms like Amazon Prime, Netflix, they have been under a lot of criticism recent years because they are showing content which is not regulated content, which would like even with adult rating also, that's like I seeing it myself as to close my eyes, because there are certain things, certain violent scenes that comes up being an adult. So they are forming a consortium, all the OTT players, and they want to self-regulate themselves so that the government doesn't come hard on them, and they tell, okay, we have already done that. So there is nothing stopping for a leader like, say, Microsoft to take a lead on this and tell that we are setting up the AI standards for India. So that's a very good suggestion from you, Samit, but I think someone has to take a lead on that and do it. Yes, Nitin.
One thing I can say for sure, Rohini, you've got a brand ambassador in this particular discussion for Microsoft. That's Avik Sarkar, so take his words. But having said that,
No,
and this
we just work on a lot of things and a lot of common, I would say, interests and aspirations, I would say.
But I think, so, Samir, I know you probably have some questions that you want to ask, but since
No,
I
go
know
ahead.
nothing about OTT platform, my question to that is, my second thought to that is, what is probably not okay to you is okay to somebody else. So really, it comes back to who's that authority, who should take that call on what content is okay, what content is not okay.
No, Nitin, what I am proposing is that you don't set that as a standard. You can tell that this is the common document on standards that we collectively are coming up with, and then you take it to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, MIB, and tell them.
But what is the incentive? What is the incentive for the OTT players to do that?
The government will come at a stop all OTT. Netflix banned in India, Amazon Prime banned. You don't want that to happen.
For the fear of not being able to be able to exist, they have to do it in the right way. Is what we are saying.
Exactly, I think that exists for, even say taking the example of Microsoft Pay. Again, now I've told us so many good things about Rohini that we talk something which is the negative sense. So this was something that happened 5 years back. People still remember it. People still remember it, and it
Okay,
caused a
okay.
lot
I
of.
think even before we go on from there, my question is, and my discomfort is, okay, my discomfort is, why should government decide for me?
Nitin, uh, okay, let me chime in. My question was specific to this particular facet. I think broadly, now let's put ourselves into the shoes of users, consumers, and the action, rather, what we see today on the algorithm side is what they don't understand. I mean, now, now this is a question which I'm asking if I'm in their shoes. To what extent you will go and trust a system, of course, an AI system which is unregulated? Now,
Yeah.
that's the question as experts, practitioner, influencers, I want you to answer. Now, think in the shoes of someone who's absolutely a novice, an OTT kind of a, let's say, person who's just got a membership of Netflix. How do you kind of put a response to this, please?
Yeah. So, Samir, let me take a stab at it from the AI perspective. So, AI perspective. So, first is that there are different groups in India who are talking about the AI ethics part, and there are three dominant groups. One is the social scientists. Social scientist is one group. Technologist is one group, like us, and then there are the lawyers. So, if anything goes wrong, then ultimately they have to deal with the issue. So we talk about a lot of the issues, and then ultimately what it comes down to is everything is nice and rosy. But if there is something that is violation, someone's life is lost, someone's interest is violated, who deals with it? Lawyers have to deal with it. So there is a legal community who also comes in. There is this intersection of these three communities that comes who are interested in the issue, and we have to talk in a language that is understandable to these three communities. The moment we go into
And
algorithm and
who are the social scientists, Avik? You mentioned about social scientists.
social scientists are basically, say, Center for Internet and Society, students from, say, Tata Institute of Social Science, say, Brookings, CPR, all of them are now coming up with a Center for Tech Policy. So there are these people, think tanks, who are now going into the area of tech, because tech is a hot topic. So you will see there are a lot of companies where we are tech policy companies. So very different type of dimension. So I interact with all of them. So I have seen that you might not have interacted with many of those players, but they are the dominant voices in the ethical AI part.
Sure. Nitin, now please chime in.
So no, let me just. So that was that's the background. Now I want to talk to you about is that there are four major user groups of stakeholders when we are talking about an AI application. The first group of stakeholder is the citizen, a patient, a student. Jisko the AI finally affects. So they are finally impacted by the AI. So you or Rohini sitting in a room, write some piece of code, upload it on the cloud, and then we sleep. We are not bothered about it after that. So that the first group of stakeholder is that who is it impacting. The second is that who is front-ending this application. So say Microsoft, I'm taking an example of Microsoft. Again, Microsoft might have developed an application, but this has been, the front-end company is, say, Apollo Hospital or Manipal Hospital, or some hospital, if they have done something in the healthcare, say, or say if it's some state government which is doing something in the agriculture space. So who is the front-ending brand or organization who is rolling out the AI application? There is something wrong that happens, their image will be heard the most. Because they will find out about who the backend developer was maybe after 1 week, but by that time it was like a lost game. Like say we talk about the recent Titan Raga ad. We all know about Titan and that ad. We don't know the creative agency who developed that ad. And so again, the third aspect that we need to know is that the AI development companies who are developing at the back end. Sometimes they might be front-ending it, like say Facebook or Microsoft, IBM. So they have developed it and they are only front-ending the application. So there is a third user group or the stakeholder group. And the fourth user group is the regulators or government. they have different interests for different group. They have to ensure the citizens' interest and privacy is kept intact. They have to ensure that businesses run for the companies who are front-ending it, and they have a vibrant innovation ecosystem for the developer community. So government has a multiple roles to play. So they have to now balance all these things together. So we have to think about all these users group when we think about ethical AI. We tend to think only about the algorithmic and the technical group, which is the group number 3. But the other 3 groups are often left out of the discussion.
Can I let me
Yeah. I think the example that you took about Tanishq ad as an example of a wrong use of AI. Are we saying that we are deciding and we are branding that as a wrong use? I personally don't agree with that.
No, that is not an AI. The Tanishq ad was about.
You just use that as an example of something gone wrong. The fact that we are saying that something has gone wrong is not a clear example.
It was just an example of there was a front-ending company, Tata Group, and there is a back-end creative agency. None of us know who the creative agency is. We all know that Tata Group posted that ad, and all the social media negative posts that was received by the Tata Group. So that was the only differentiation. There were one person making it. In that case, the AI development company can be someone else, as compared to who is front-ending with the customer and providing services.
So if and this is what I'm looking, and Avik touched a broader point, but Nitin, Rohini, this is what I'm looking, and again I'm going to that level where there is a user, just like there is a disclaimer at the start of a movie. What is that disclaimer should be in terms of how far should we go to kind of trust something which is unregulated? So that's what we're looking at.
So I'd like to add a couple of comments to the last couple, at least 2-3 comments that I've had. One is, I think I do like Avik's point about the 4 different stakeholders, and it is a useful discussion to have, a distinction to have, not just because the development of an AI product or solution is a complex activity, but also because it is not a one-time activity. Because an AI system is learning along the way. So even if you were to develop it one time, you need to have an oversight which is at the operations time. Okay, so that is one important point. The second point is that, and which is why when I was earlier talking about AI principles, it even a large organization like Microsoft or anybody else cannot dictate those principles to our customers. But at the end of the day, you are taking those tools from a platform and you are using those APIs as building blocks to create something. What you create is actually not even visible. Sometimes if you're using an infrastructure as a service, it's not even visible to the platform. Okay, and therefore our ability, when I say our, meaning Microsoft's ability is in some ways somewhat the hands are tied in many ways, right? And so we tend to go to our customers and partners and say, this is what we are seeing, this is what we are trying to learn. And what I mean by this here is that there is a set of 6 principles, and that goes to the previous point, Samir, you were raising about, why is data privacy being talked about before bias? Well, these are very related. Okay, and therefore these principles that we have come out with are around fairness, inclusivity, security and privacy, safety and reliability, accountability and transparency. Because these together are, think of them as a MEC, mutually exclusive, cumulatively exhaustive kind of picture. And one could say, okay, this is missing, that is missing, sure. But to us, these 6 principles have become a pretty good way of looking in the mirror and saying that, are we by and large thinking of the issues involved here? But that we can do only for our products, for which are first party products. But when we become a platform provider where somebody else creates applications using our platform tools or just our compute, right, they have to be cognizant of what their AI ethics principles are and how they are implementing them, and how not only are they testing in building development time, but in operations. So it is indeed a multi-stakeholder issue. It is indeed an issue that government also needs to play a role, and it is in playing a role in regulated industries where the government is saying, I do want to have explainable models, financial services being one of them, healthcare being another one of them, and that is the right thing to do. But for us to sit as one body that can come and say, "Thou shalt do it this way," it is just not that simple.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think the example that you were saying, I was just thinking at the back of my mind. It's like, if a metal producer is being taken to task for somebody having developed a weapon versus somebody having developed a shield is not a fair onus that you put on the metal producer. Metal producer is producing metal. But I think I also have a few follow up thoughts and questions on that. Is who's that body? You spoke about safety and reliability, and let's just go a little deeper into safety and reliability, right? Safety rules world over are thou shalt not kill anybody else, right? That's one of the key principles of safety. Now let's say one society, one geography, one country is developing that AI. Let's say it's US, right? And they are developing a very, very mature AI system which is not trained to kill anybody on the streets. Take that same AI, even if you convert it from left side driving to right side driving and all that stuff, and put it into a totally different environment, say India, right? Where the diligence to follow the rules is so low that anybody can shoot up from anywhere. But in the US, when that car is going to drive, it's going to assume if I have a green light, I'm going to go because nobody else is expected to come in, right? But in India, if somebody just shoots up and comes in the way, who takes ownership of that? So the point that I'm trying to get to is there a universal definition of safety and reliability, not only in driving but in AI as well? Is one government's view enough only for that, and do they have to keep in mind their society, their country to develop these rules, frameworks, governance, or does it have to be abstracted a little bit more and make it more universal? I think those are the questions. I don't know if we have even the authority to even ask, but those are the real questions that we should be really focusing about. Or the think tank, the decision makers, the authorities, people who are making those decisions, are they looking at it from their narrow lens of their purview, their sphere of influence versus something which is much larger and global? Because the AI, the models that we're talking about, especially with the advent of open source, is not going to be restricted to one geography, one use case, one ethical, one social standard. It's going to be pervasive across.
So my only ask to the panel, okay, now this is, look, prescriptive is the best way to kind of give some nuggets, because if we confuse the audience, no one beside us will be able to kind of see this thing from a lens what we are seeing. And that's why my suggestion always to the group, of course, everyone gets that, and it's good that we're having this high octane conversation, and that's exactly what's required after lunch time. Otherwise, a Friday noon becomes a siesta time, and this is exactly what we wanted as part of galvanizing everyone. But here is what my suggestion would be: that what do we do? Because now, good part is that what I think all of you touched that is something which there is no one specific formula or approach. Now, I'm just trying to kind of take one aspect and then open up to each one of you. And singularity, this is being talked about big time today. Now, there is an infancy of AI, we understand, but at some stage now, a bit, I would say, for looking into the future, or more kind of having a peek into the future. Now, we also want machines to come in, provide efficiency, effectiveness. We also want automation to rebalance the human machine equation. And we also want to increase the nation's productivity, human employability, and all those things. Now, with that said, at some level, we are also talking about some of the control going away to these intelligent machines. And this is exactly what, Rohini, you started with, kind of a thing in the beginning. Now, if that needs to happen, now this is a bit more, I would say, of course, not today's scenario, as machines will get more, I would say, smarter and more kind of a robust. How do we see that world evolving? Do we give that control and expect those experimentation through trials and tribulations? Or we need to put in some governance, in this case ethics, to say, if not a complete rule book, at least we are putting a practice sharing kind of a document so that it becomes more like a ready reckoner. So I'm just opening to each one of you, and it will be really great if you can be a bit more prescriptive, please.
So maybe I'll just start by sort of almost reiterating some of the points I was making earlier. I think there are organizations and global bodies that are putting together, a set of framework principles to think about, because I do believe that this is early to say that it can be prescriptive. There are certain very sliver areas where regulation can play a role. I think the only prescription that I would have for people is to increase your awareness. Both increase your awareness as well learn about the nuances and not look at only headlines, because headlines can be misleading and headlines can take the country down a path to say, this is not good for our country and we really cannot afford that. So it is important for us to understand that this is a complex issue and we learn about it. And then I think the question that becomes, to your point about where do we see singularity happening? Well, I think we are a bit away from it. Let it evolve. But in the meantime, I think the important role that AI can and should be playing in the country is to help augment people's capabilities and really be that augmented intelligence. So we are able to bridge that gap between high qualified, let's say, teachers or healthcare professionals or specialists, and be able to provide access of that high quality, professionals to people in the broad part of the country where you don't have that kind of expertise, and yet AI enabled augmented mechanisms, let's say a health diagnostic and things like that, or personalized training or language translation capabilities can really bridge that gap. So I would say the India opportunity is on augmenting using AI to bridge the need of the country today, and we'll worry about the super intelligence and singularity when it happens.
Wonderful. Augment human capability with AI. That's a kind of a talking point. Great. Nitin, Avik, over to you, please.
So I clearly don't have a prescription as of now here, but a few things which, if I were to put some thoughts about it, it would be, if at a wherever we have the control, wherever we have the sphere of influence, and it could be a company, it could be an organization, a large organization, it could be use of that, or it could be a country. Wherever we believe the use of AI is going to cause more benefit than harm, or is going to cover a majority of the population with positive effects, because to ensure and absolutely ascertain that there is not going to be any negative or detrimental use case emerging out of that is probably, to my mind, a little far out. We don't necessarily have those capabilities to control literally everybody's ability to use it. I think that should be our guiding force. And if we really are worried about singularity, then to my mind, all our focused effort with the right people, with the people who have the wherewithal and the ability and the understanding of the core working of the AI models, which I don't think I clearly have, but I'm sure there are people who are really out there, to be focused on developing a machine which has absolutely fair, non-human like, unbiased decisions and objectives and core principles, and let that figure out where the singularity is going to evolve, rather than we trying to make a second guess on what that right definition, what that correctness is going to be. So I know it sounds a little philosophical, but all I'm saying is, within our spheres of influence, focus on things which are more positive than negative, and if we really are worried about singularity, focus on just one purest system and let that evolve.
Great. Avik?
So yes, see, the type of discussion that we are having now is very common when a new technology comes. So if you look at the history of technology over the years and centuries, you will see any technology that has come, starting from cars, bicycle, electricity, PCs, they have gone through a phase of resistance and uncertainty. So that uncertainty will be there. So I think we, as Dr. Rohini was telling, we regarding to AI, we are only at the phase of infancy. This aspect, the negative discussion on AI, will even increase more once we see certain mishaps happening in the society. And as it becomes popular, there will not every company is Microsoft. There will be companies who will try to cut corners and put a system in production before it's completely tested or has taken care of all the loose ends, and there will be mishaps that will happen, and this will create a huge havoc. So this has to happen, but I think that is how something develops. You don't get the perfect recipe of a biryani on day one, And I started with food. I think you have to try many things. You have to fail. You have to eat the burnt rice and burnt chicken multiple times before you know what the perfect recipe of biryani is. I think that is, we have to go through that phase. Having said the philosophical part, I think now if we come to the more practical part, I think there are institutions like the International Standards Organization, IEEE, country has come up with documents. MNCs have come up with some frameworks that are there. So these frameworks will be the guiding force, and then I think sectors have to come in and do their own. As all the other panelists also talked about, you can use the same technology, but if you are using it for tagging of photos on Facebook just for fun and gives other people giving a thumbs up and thumbs down, I don't matter if I am wrongly tagged. But if the same application is used for identifying whether I'm a criminal or not, yes, I will be bothered about what has been there. When it goes into the aspect of the same image recognition, going and identifying whether I have some disease, and based on that doing some prescribing me some medicines or doing some diagnostic on me, or even helping during a robotic surgery, yes, those systems have to be much more accurate than there. So there will be systems like, say, Nitin mentioned about 22 carat, 24 carat, and some sort of rating system. So there will be rating system, and we will say, if you're talking about a healthcare where life is at stake, we will only like to work with a system which is 24 carat and have gone through all the phases, like the clinical trials. We know, again, going to a different context, the healthcare examples are really very impactful, because if you do it something wrong, you lose a life. We know people are suffering with COVID. People are doing the drugs, but there is a described 5-phase process for a drug acceptance. So if you have to launch a drug in the market, you have to go through the 5 phase. Even if it means you have to wait for 2 years, yes, you have to wait for the 2 years. So if someone wants to come up with the AI application that they want to use in healthcare or something that is very critical in nature, yes, they have to wait for the 2 years or 5 years. I think that is where the industry has to take and the sector has to take that call. Like general AI guidelines, I think that cannot be decided. That I think that the healthcare industry will take some call. Maybe the education industry will take some other call. Again, these calls will be country specific. Nitin talked about a lot of, say, killing someone is unacceptable across the world. We all accept it. But if you see all the list of 200 plus countries, each one has a different penalty for killing people.
Yeah.
In some you kill the person actually, in some you lash the person, some you just let them live happily. So that also matters. If you can kill a person, but then what happens to you after that matters. And that is where I think the interesting aspect of liability comes in with ethics.
So good part of having you towards the end of the week, that you also consolidate and take all the pieces what I want to say. But I think that's the beauty, in fact, of you summing it up, because I think if we just paraphrase, I think that theme topic per se is broad, diverse, and calls for a lot of, I would say, debate and discussion. But the good part, which at least I could infer from the conversation, that while the technology is at the infancy, there is a haze, but the intent about how to go about creating more awareness, more kind of aspects about how user at the ground level, the base of the pyramid, understand the usage and the effectiveness of AI, because that's crucial, and that's something which each one of you called out, that the more applications, the more use cases gets into the public, into the mainstream, the more awareness starts getting built, and that's where rules, regulations, and those frameworks which are still at a stage which is on the paper will get translated into meaningful, tangible thought process in the minds of everyone. And that's how I think each of these revolutions have talked and kind of, let's say, taught us, in terms of saying that while we are talking about AI revolution, let the clarity prevail with the more use cases, more mainstream happening in terms of how AI will proliferate into our daily lives, challenge our decision making, and also, as Rohini said, augment the capability of the humans, what we call ingenuity. Thank you so much out here. And Suman, I would now love you to kind of take over the stage for.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you, speakers. I think, like you said, it was really a very high octane discussion, something we don't want to see coming to an end. But one very
So
important thing,
that's
Samir.
the beauty. See, at the end of the day, this is the beauty I started with. That since we know all
Yeah.
each other, at the background, we knew that we'll be able to create high octane action.
No, no. Thank you for that. One
and
thing I
and
would
and
want.
we know all of us know we are not even done yet. We can probably go on for another 2 hours. Maybe we will, and we're not done yet.
Absolutely.
We do have a few questions also, Samir, like we discussed. There are a lot of comments in the chat section which has come up. So before I open it for question answers, I just want to ask the audience, would there be anybody who would want to ask anything live to this set of speakers? You could raise a hand and I could get you on stage if you want to, present your views or ask anything to the speakers. Starting with the questions, this one comes for you, Dr. Rohini from Sunil David. He is asking, since there is a possibility of biases creeping into AI algorithms, would having a specific role of an algorithm bias manager help? And secondly, having a diverse set of AI developers and coders also be a possible solution?
It's a great question. In fact, I would build on the question to say that, when we, as what I was earlier mentioning regarding putting principles into practice, one of the elements of it becomes governance. And governance structures. And as part of governance structures, we do think about either an ethics officer or ethics committee or whatever the right model might be, right? And therefore, bias is one element of overall responsible AI, and therefore having somebody who's thinking about bias and not just thinking about it, but also having the tools and techniques, because there's an active area of research. If you look at AI community, the amount of research happening on tools and techniques for responsible AI it's a very active area of research, right? So checking for data sets for hidden biases, and a fair learn, looking at trade-offs of your model to be able to remove or have a trade-off between accuracy versus bias against certain population segments. Many of that work is happening. So that's one part. Second part is diversity and diversity in AI developer ecosystem is another huge topic of debate. If you look at some of the leading researchers in this space, because only when you have diversity of thought who create these AI systems can you even be asking the right questions. You will not even ask the right questions if you don't have diversity of thought. So it is paramount importance that if we didn't think about diversity before this, now is a really good time to be putting it front and
Yeah.
center in the agenda.
Yeah. And if I may just add another subtext to it,
Yeah.
I think absolutely completely in agreement with whatever Dr. Rohini said is, I don't think we are anywhere close, or we would probably ever be at a point where we can declare victory that, yeah, we have achieved a completely unbiased system, right? As long as we have that skeptical empiricism built into our approach, that we are willing to change our sets of beliefs with new evidence, new data, new instances that we come across, and we incorporate that into our definition of systems and algorithms, we probably will be making progress. It's probably very, very difficult to ever declare victory.
Thank you. Another one is there any way we can minimize or eliminate bias in the algorithms of AI? I mean, what is the best possible way of getting about to do so?
I will actually ask Samir to talk about it, because Samir, you talk often about, and because we know each other, right? Samir talks often about human cognitive biases.
Yeah.
So I would love to sort of have Samir talk about the fact that as humans, it's not like we are we are devoid of biases. Maybe over to Samir.
So glad, Rohini, to win the ring of now speaker. Moderators do come with some restrictions, which that role someone has now taken over. So I think fundamentally, when we talk, and this is something Rohini started with, but in my own hypothesis, there is a theory around how AI is actually taking over the decision making, whether it's on the professional side or on the personal side. And I give that analogy that as human beings, we take close to about 60 odd decisions on any given day: strategic, operating, operational, tactical. What is that I have to do after this particular meeting? What's my plan for the evening? What's my career plan? Now, think of this today, the way we are progressing. chunk of these decisions are being taken by algorithms. We are looking at AirMeet, we are looking at our meeting schedule, we are looking at Netflix, we are looking at, and everything has an underpinning of algorithm. Now think of this, if that starts happening, what exactly it does to the human decision making, which is also governed by algorithm over there. Now that's where, outside of what we call basically augmenting the intelligence, the piece what Rohini touched upon, or what Nitin said about this rebalancing human-machine equation, one critical part which we often miss, which is where I call the trifactor, is how do you incorporate human behavior, which is where the aspect of behavioral science, cognitive neuroscience, anthropology, ethnography comes into the picture, because I keep on saying that the days of market research are over. From the time, let's say, an FMCG industry takes AC Nielsen data, it's a T plus 45. You've already lost a quarter battle. Now, here you have an ethnographic profiling of the consumer real time on your screen, and how you bake in is something which is a testimony what Facebook has done. Any friend request, what each one of us get, and we are all on the Facebook as we know, comes with a 50,000 kind of a, let's say, assumption variables and ethnographic profiling built in. So imagine the kind of advancements which have happened, which today seemingly these decision making capabilities are influenced. AI is, of course, at the top, but a lot of that incorporating human behavior is coming to the picture. And by the way, this is not my theory. There is a book by Dan Ariely called Predictably Irrational. And this is where this entire thing comes in, where we say that eventually it will be how we will augment our capability, how we will ensure we'll work with the machine. And third is human beings will have to not talk about just AI, it's about other things first as well.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that, Samir. So there is one which is come from Pralada Rangaraj, who is asking us how do machines affect our behavior and interactions, and how do we stay in control of a complex intelligent system?
Avik, you want to take that, please?
Yeah, so it's a very tricky question. Like, so how do we stay in control? Is like, who wants to take the control? So and who wants to control whom? I think is the bigger question that we needs to is it
And please
And,
don't
and,
take the
and the
moderator who
illusion
takes the
and the
control.
illusion of control, let me put it that way.
yes
Also the
yes
Yeah,
illusion of
yeah.
control.
yes. So the
But I
US
think to my mind,
US election results are still on, and who is controlling it? We don't know. So I think
Samir, there are some very good examples. Sorry, Avik, please go ahead.
yes. No, please go on. Please go on.
No, I was saying Samir actually gave very good examples of how the interactions are affected by the machines, and that's exactly what the question is. How the machines affect our behavior. What he was saying, our calendars, our phones, sort of taking decisions on our behalf. They are really affecting our decisions, and we actually tend to believe them, trust them, and go along with them as long as it suits us. I think one way of sort of, if I, and that's something that I keep doing, is confuse the AI. Not just keep on repeating the same behavior which reinforces my persona, my definition, my categorization in the minds of AI. Demonstrate behavior which is very, very weird, which may not even necessarily be what I would want to do, but just confuse the AI. And hopefully you can stay ahead of the race of AI trying to control you, and you can try to control it a little bit better.
I'll just add one more thought to what Nitin and Avik and Samir were saying. See, I think we often and the idea of this predictably irrational, right? Because there have been studies which have shown that a group of judges looking at cases, what their propensity for giving somebody a parole or the length of parole, etc., as they come closer to lunchtime, has a very huge variance.
Yes.
Okay. So so human beings are not rational. We are not rational. We think we are rational. We think we have got this amazing sense of cognition. But we are working. I mean, our limbic systems and our prefrontal cortex, I mean, it's got us fooled. So
Yes.
in many ways, I think this is an opportunity, right, to one, think about the fact that we are irrational, and therefore as we are thinking about building algorithms, what is it that we are building in. And number two, maybe in certain cases, algorithms can actually keep us honest because they
Exactly.
don't
I
tire.
think algorithms devoid of emotions can probably
Yeah,
be better checks and can
yeah.
keep us honest, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we have hiring decisions that are completely determined by the completely conscious or unconscious biases of the hiring manager. Is that fair? Is that always the correct way of doing things? I would
Yeah.
argue no.
True.
So yeah, there is a flip side to what machines can do, and I think it's again goes back to that balance and augmenting and
Yeah.
helping machines keep us honest and keeping the machines honest.
Yes, so I think Rohini, I think you raised a very important point. When I talk about AI, I also talk about technology. So technology, whenever you see any technology that comes, it helps as an equalizer. So any technology, so the digital technology that has come in the last few years has been an equalizer for a lot of the people who cannot access it. So we take e-commerce, for example. Tier 2, Tier 3 cities were not able to access the best of goods. Now, with e-commerce coming in, they are able to do. I think with AI coming in, that will also be an equalizer in terms of, say, getting access to good education, good healthcare. When there is a scarcity of good teachers and doctors, that can be equalizer. Like if you have a humanoid teaching someone in a village. I actually the fact is that in China they are actually doing a lot of this in reality. The rest of the world has to catch up. So each school, the way their system is that they have like each school is not AI, just normal technology. So they have one good school, and that they tie up with two or three other schools which are weaker in the same vicinity, and they will have the people take the class together in a collaborative way. So those have been transmitted in real time, and you get the advantage of the good teacher where you do not have the good teacher. So I think technology will be an equalizer. A lot of the biases that we have, like yes, if I am in a bad mood with having fought with someone, that will have an impact on my work the whole day. If I'm really happy, maybe I will write 100 extra lines of code that day. So those are the type of things that happens to all of us. So I think if eliminate those aspects, those will be really good.
But there's one thing, Avik, just to extend, and I'll take a minute on this. For the first time, we are talking about AI just not being a technology or a tool or an application. I think it far more goes into what I call today, and some of you can vouch, getting embedded into strategy of the organization. And this is something what has not happened with any other previous technology, if I call it. Now, so of course, there is a level playing field. There is a lot of that mainstreaming which needs to happen. But I think somewhere the power of AI coming together, and Rohini touched the right point that AI alone is not enough. You need that kind of, let's say, cognitive neurosciences, behavioral capabilities, maybe design thinking, which is how you design for the subconscious mind. But I think far more 5 years down the line, if we have this conversation, we may be seeing organizations which have strategies inbuilt with AI, and they are becoming the kind of secret sauce for running the whole organization.
Exactly. Yes.
True. Yeah. Well said, Samir. Yeah.
Now, I think with that we have come to the end of the session. I would just like pass this on to you, Samir, if you would want to summarize this post the question answers that we've had, and thank all the speakers for being with us today.
Well, all I can say, Suman, first of all, thank you so much for having us, IIT, you and the team behind, because there is a lot which goes into, making this particular session happen, and modalities and somewhere that nitty gritties are way more complex than what we can think of, because AI is still not over there actually making it easy. And then, of course, to what I call my friends, Nitin, Rohini, and Avik, they're always a call away, and there is somewhere an underpinning which is again devoid of AI, which is not to say no when each one of us look out for each other health, and that comes absolutely straight from the heart with no biases, no kind of a let's say malpractices,
No filter.
for let's say on relationship, and that maybe will stay. And I'm sure the audience have been able to get a grasp of the different diverse perspective. Of course, we went in a manner where we wanted to touch upon a whole series and a range of, I would say, theme. But the idea was that since the topic is broad, just to lay it down in terms of saying that, look, there are a lot of things which needs to emerge, and somewhere some of these aspects coming from practitioners like three of them will be a kind of a stepping stone for the further discussions and more calibration checks and all. Thank you so much, three of you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Samir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Suman.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you. And thank you, audience, for giving us the time.